Hi, good afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to join us. This is our 8th webinar when we look at the challenges that modern marketing and selling face. The presentation is going to last for about 45 minutes. We'll have time at the end for questions, so please post them to the questions box. So today we're looking at the critical role that website design plays in high quality B2B lead generation, and I would like to welcome Scott Armstrong and Matteo Giovanni from Brainrider. Why Brainrider when they're based in Toronto, you might ask? Well, in our experience, they're one of the best website designers and developers in the world because they have a deep understanding of the changing buyer journey and how to adapt to it from a website perspective. We've run projects with them and they work. So if you're looking at working and developing your website, then I recommend that you add them to the list of potential partners to talk to. But before I take you through the agenda, I'd like you to keep this thought central in your mind. So why is website design so important for high quality lead generation? With a changing buyer journey, high quality lead generation is consistently the number one challenge and priority for chief marketing officers all over the world. With the increasing pressure on marketing, that's not likely to change. Two of the most recent important industry surveys confirm findings from the past. So, Bright Talk, the 2015 lead generation survey, found that 59% of marketeers would put generating high quality leads as their biggest lead generation challenge. When you look at the priorities for lead generation, 68% will say that it's an increase in lead quality. 55% would say an increase in lead volume, and that confirms what IDG found earlier in the year around the biggest lead generation challenges are all around generating high quality leads. So today I'd like to set the context by looking at the key challenges that are involved in marketing, generating high quality leads to support the sales effort. And then Scott and Matteo are going to look at the role best practice website design plays in helping solve those challenges. And they're going to showcase some specific examples. So what's changing in modern marketing and selling? So the B2B buying journey is becoming increasingly self-educated and self-directed. This is driven by the abundance and quality and the availability of information that is now quickly and easily accessible via the internet. So buyers can get the majority of information they need to progress most of the way through the buying cycle. And from a personal point of view, you only have to think about how you would go about, finding, learning, educating, and considering your options for buying a new car, which should be a considered important purchase for you. So research, why is that important? Well, research predicts that, leading into, and this is consistent across all the big studies, is that, the majority of the buying process is already complete before buyers are prepared to engage in human conversation. And Gartner and Forrester are talking about that going to as high as 80% over the next 5 years. So all of that stuff will be complete before buyers are prepared to talk to sales. Now, this represents a huge challenge for both marketing and for sales. So marketing is now responsible for the majority of the buying cycle. So not only in generating the initial awareness and interest, but now in those much harder and more deeper engagement phases of helping buyers to progress through, their education and consideration phases. But most importantly, marketing's got to be able to identify the buyers that are ready for a sales conversation and do that ahead of competition so that you can focus the sales effort on those. So one of our key philosophies is that if buyers want to self-educate and they want to self-direct, then let them. But make sure that you lead the conversation so that when they are ready to talk, when they do have BANT, so they are a target buyer, they've got authority, they've got a need, and they've got time, and they've got budget, then they're ready to engage. When they get to that stage, that you make sure that you're the preferred supplier, so because you've led the conversation. So how do you do that? So here is just a quick schematic where you would look at, if we look at what's the total addressable market for the target sector that we're going after, and what are the marketing approaches that we would use to make them aware and interested and engaged. So you could use traditional marketing elements, or you could do inbound marketing elements, or you could use what we tend to major on, which is a more direct. You can go through the funnel marketing approach, where you look to build out the database for your total addressable market. You look to understand the content that the buyers need at each stage of the buying cycle, and I have given some guidelines on what they're looking for there at the awareness and the education and the consideration phases. You look to engage and nurture your prospects with targeted and relevant lead nurturing campaigns that are specific to each of the buyer personas and for each buying cycle stage. You use lead scoring models to identify the prospects that are most engaged and when the threshold that they're at when they're ready for a sales conversation. And you use the ability, because you can see who's at each stage, you're able to manage leads from an end-to-end manner through the entire demand funnel to ensure that no leads are lost, and also to be able to identify where things are not working so well and where you can improve. But the most important thing is the ability for marketing to zero in and identify the prospects that look as though they're ready for a sales conversation, and then to be able to hand them to sales in a way that, with all of the history, such that sales has a good chance of engaging them. And you cannot do that with any real confidence without a marketing automation platform. If you think of CRM systems as managing the sales pipeline, and marketing automation platforms manage the entire marketing funnel. So the reason that website design is so important is because of the role that the website plays in the middle and the bottom of the funnel at these education and consideration stages. A good website will encourage prospects, to continue to self-educate and direct, through their buying process, but it will also be able to help self-qualify prospects that are ready for a sales conversation. So the types of behavior that you're looking for, are these. So you're looking for the ability to be able to pick up multiple site visits and frequency, which is going to lead to a big score increase. You're looking for, above average time on the website, above average number of page visits, the viewing depth of product or service pages, the viewing of pricing information, the viewing of particular case studies, whether buyers have registered for product or service content that requires a time commitment from them, whether that be webinar or free trial or demo, whether they've attended any online events, and also being able to integrate those that have attended offline events, and whether they've engaged with any of the lead nurturing campaigns that are more around the education consideration content that is middle of the funnel. So that will lead you to, if you could only see that on Google Analytics, that'll look for a spike, of activity on this. But it's only when you have the full insight that a marketing automation platform gives you, can you particularly focus in on this type of behavior and map that to a specific prospect's activity. With Google Analytics, it's all anonymous. So, every week we drive high quality marketing originated leads into our client sales teams, which transforms the size, quality, and scalability of the sales pipelines, and which they consistently tell us is one of the most effective investments of their marketing dollars. You can find out how we do it in more detail and by looking at 2 of the latest ebooks on our website. I'd also be happy to jump on a quick call with anyone who'd like, an overview or more specific detail. But what I'd like to do now is turn to Scott and Matteo and to look at in detail what is best practice website design for B2B high quality generation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Scott Armstrong, who is the founding partner of Brainrider.
Terrific. What a great introduction, Scott. I really like the context of setting it up in terms of what are you trying to accomplish from a lead perspective. I'm just going to make sure that my screen is showing for anybody who's watching. So let's make sure that loads. And so I'm presenting today with one of our technical experts, Matteo Giovanni, and we're really going to walk you through not just business website design, but really specifically business or B2B website design for lead generation. And some of the elements that we're going to cover in today's session include how to set design and development priorities, how to design page layouts based on your objectives, so to give you more business and marketing reasons to guide your design team, how to build customer-focused content pathways to do that engagement that Scott was talking about with your prospect as they go through their buyer journey. And then Matteo is going to talk about how to make the marketing back-end marketing user-ready. There's a great set of technologies called content management systems, which allow more marketing-savvy users to make changes, strategic updates, content updates, campaign updates to websites without having to go through their IT group or a designer developer and slowing the process down. And he's going to talk about how to measure site performance. So what are some of the key metrics you should be looking for from a business perspective, from a marketing objectives perspective, and then from a tactical perspective. And then we'll provide some budget guidelines for a successful project. So the first place to start when you're thinking about designing a lead generation site is actually not the design. It's understanding your objectives. So lead generation can break into really how do you manage your marketing and sales pipeline. And there are often, for almost all of the B2B clients we work with, there are 4 priorities they focus on. The first is getting traffic to your site, so generating qualified traffic. The second is acquiring prospects, so converting that traffic to your site into known prospects in your marketing automation platform that Scott talked about. Thirdly is engaging and nurturing prospects that are within your database already. And then finally, and often most importantly at the end of the day, is qualifying more sales-ready leads. Almost all B2B marketers have those priorities within their marketing objectives. But the key is understanding where's the pain point within your pipeline. If you have lots of site traffic, you don't really need to spend much more on pay-per-click to drive visitors to your website. You really need to focus on converting more of the existing qualified site traffic into known prospects. So as part of the website design development process, we recommend using a simple cheat sheet like this one to help you turn your priorities into measurable objectives and benchmarks, and really order the priority that they should focus in as you build your website design and develop it. So what's on this chart, on the left is the priority and objective, and on the right is really how you measure that on your website. And then the empty boxes can be filled in what are the biggest pain points for you within your marketing mix today. And as I mentioned, for many clients that we work with, they actually generate decent qualified traffic to their website. Their bigger challenge is converting more of that site traffic into known prospects. And so we filled in the numbers for a typical client project. Priority number 1 is acquiring prospects. Priority number 2 is qualifying more prospects. Priority number 3 is filling the top of that pipeline with traffic, and then the 4th priority is nurturing. Your priorities might be different, but the ability to understand which are most important will guide the balance of the design process. Because if your key priority is I need to acquire more prospects, and the measurement is how quickly is my database growing or how many new prospects am I acquiring in any given period, then really what you're going to be looking for are more opt-in calls to action prioritized within your design and development. You need forms completed to capture prospects. And so that's subscription forms, gated content forms, and other calls to action about opting in new prospects. That will affect the site design, the content pathways, the content that you're featuring, and even form design that you're using. Let's take a look at that in practice. So here's a great client that we work with called Ecova. They're based out of California. They're a super great team. Their site is very, however, traditional from a B2B marketing perspective. It's nice and clean. It feels a bit modern. If you take a look at how a visitor to a website will consume that content, particularly in Western cultures, what actually happens is we read it much like we read a book. We come in, we'll start in the top left corner, our eyes will scan across the top, they'll drop down just a little bit and do one more scan. And that highlighted area on this page creates really a triangle of priority information space. Now you can affect how the visitor views your site with some graphic design elements, and so designers are constantly trying to cheat the way that people most typically scan a site by prioritizing other elements. So in the COVID example, the use of white space around the brand makes it pop. The use of an image and a headline makes the utility program solutions part pop, and then some iconography in the bottom right of the page draw your eye in that direction. But the combination of the way that browsers or visitors naturally look at your site and your design really needs to be optimized against your priorities. And so here's a really great, easy to use wireframe cheat sheet. And what a wireframe is, it's what's the logical or strategic structure of your site design. So strip away the way it looks, the colors and the graphics. Where do you want people to look first, and what do you want to communicate to them? And we always recommend taking that content, that objectives prioritization exercise you did, and applying it to your wireframes, both for your home page and for interior page. So you can see branding is important, navigation is important, but so is your primary call to action and search. Main messaging is focused in that key box objective number 1, optional secondary messaging as you scan across the page, and then as you go further down the page, you get into other objectives. Remember, more than 70% of your visitors are not going to get below the bottom of the page they see when they first loads. And so you want all of your core messaging and calls to action to be occurring in the space where they're going to see it most easily. Here's an example of a Brainrider client, Bridgeway Software. And they're really taking that principle to heart. So they've got a nice, clean design, but you can tell that the graphic elements are really designed to make their calls to action pop. And they're using a tiered call to action approach. So the site's been built with calls to action in mind. It gives visitors an opportunity to discover the most relevant information that they want to find while guiding their journey or their pathway, as Scott mentioned. But it's also packing tons of relevant calls to action into each page. The top call to action in that sidebar, need help, is a sales-ready call to action. Then there's some content calls to action, and then the bottom one is subscribe. And so within their priority tree, they're actually trying to take website visitors and making them put their hand up as sales ready first, engage them as prospects second, and their third priority is to capture new leads onto their website. In the process of capturing new leads within your site design, you really need to focus and optimize your landing page, working on frictionless forms, clickable calls to action and frictionless forms, making it really easy to guide your viewer into a page content that both tells them why they want to fill in this form. So there's lots of merchandising information. There's a little headshot. There's a great description. There's lots of content. There's some branding to sort of credentialize the information you're going to get. And it's a really short form, first name, last name, email, job title, company, to get access to that content. Regardless of what your priority is, you need to be thinking of each page design, whether it's your home page, an interior page, or a form that we just looked at, and measure it against your core objectives. And work with your designer to say, hey, we are interested in a modern, clean, great-looking business design, but we also want our design to be prioritized against these objectives. Once you've got that design element in place, then you need to really think through the navigation and organization and structure of your site in order to create customer-focused content pathways. The starting point is the knowledge that buyers actually want and need content to make a buying decision. And depending on the stage of the buying process or buyer's journey they're at, they're going to be looking for content around what's my problem, understanding what others are doing, or how to fix my problem, what are the solution alternatives that are available to me, or then finally, where most brochure websites sit today, are you right for me? What's the product? What are your credentials? What's the cost or the return on investment? So knowing that buyers want content, then you need to really think through, okay, so what kind of content do they want? And Overwhelmingly, buyers are actually looking for practical content that solves a problem and usually helps them make a decision. You can tell through Google predictive search or some other search tools that the kind of information that's present in the suffixes of a search term. So after the first couple words in a more complex B2B search term tend to be very practical. You know, in the case of B2B marketing content, people are actually looking for reports or case studies or workbooks or benchmarks. And so it's not the B2B marketing content that's most relevant. It's actually the practical orientation of the content. And that's going to be the same on your website. So your website's going to talk a lot about you, your products, and your solutions, but you also want it to provide practical content that solves a problem based on their decision stage. And so this cheat sheet or chart really gives you some content examples to use as you're building your website and understanding your audience. So if your key objective is to attract more new prospects to your site, they're not asking yet, are you right for me? So that content actually doesn't need to be featured nearly as much as they're trying to either solve a problem or understand how to fix a problem that they've identified. And so the navigation and content of your website should be much more oriented around guiding them through a what's my problem pathway, providing trend information, benchmark information, or really examples of how other people are understanding or solving that problem. Let me use Bridgeway as an example of how the website navigation structure changes based on that insight. This was their original site. Bridgeway is a great client based out of Houston. They are in the legal or corporate counsel, corporate group, ERP, or software solution business. So they help general counsels at Fortune 100 companies manage their legal department with better software solution. You would never know that looking at their old site. You know, the first image you see is of a big, heavy equipment machinery from Caterpillar. If you read along their main menu, we can understand they're in the business of being most recommended with solutions, products, clients, partners, services, news and events, and information about us. It's really not until you get over into the far right corner where you can understand at all that they're in legal service management, or down into a little bit of the body text on their page. And the pathways that are present in this navigation, solutions, products, clients, partners, are all about Bridgeway, not all about their prospect and what they want to know. So we help Bridgeway update the look and feel of their site, making it more modern, responsive, cleaner. But really the big difference from a lead generation perspective is we help them evolve their content strategy from being all about Bridgeway to being more practical content related to buyers and the journey they're on. So you can see in the navigation some of the elements that were formerly on their site, so about us or careers, news and events, products and services. But there's a new navigation element based around 4 needs and pains typical to the ideal buyer for Bridgeway. And that is, and often that navigation will answer the question, how do I? So in this case, how do I maximize attorney productivity, or how do I manage legal operations? How do I measure legal department performance, or how do I maintain corporate governance? And there's a real clear highlighted description of the business that Bridgeway is in. Bridgeway software powers high-performing legal departments. So the combination of creating customer-focused content and buyer pathways has made a huge difference in results for Bridgeway, where their digital lead generation was up more than 50% on the introduction of this site. And really, it stands to reason, because the new website is much more buyer-focused. But it's not just the home page and the navigation you need to optimize. The calls to action we showed before were from Bridgeway, so the subscribe or identify yourself as sales ready. And on interior pages, we provide a lot of what's next information to engage people. So Scott talked about, how deep are visitors going into your site and leading them? Well, this is the way you lead them, with read more calls to action. So you can see the big blocks in the middle of this page that says what next. You can see in the sidebar there's learn more or see a model. And some of those are download calls to action, and some of them are web pages, and you can test and learn what are the right calls to action, but all of them are around engaging a visitor to go more deeply into Bridgeway's value proposition. So I've talked a little bit about how you should think through site design, starting with your objectives, not the design, and then having the designer follow your priorities from a marketing perspective. How to build your site with your buyer's pathways in mind, or a customer-focused website, not just a brochure site all about you. The third thing that you should be really considering as you develop a new website is, how do you make the back end or the administration of it more marketing user ready? So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matteo, who's going to take us through some of best practice thinking in that area.
Thank you, Scott. As your marketing messaging and strategy changes, your teams need to be able to feel comfortable about making changes to your website without requiring a great deal of technical knowledge or the assistance of outside development talent. So you really need to be able to control elements like calls to action, your landing pages, fillable forms. Those all have to be editable, as well as easy to integrate with your marketing automation platform. And you also need to manage the taxonomies of your content and navigation structure. So this would allow you to cross-merchandise your product offerings, and as well as manage the customer pathways through your website that Scott talked about. Marketing users should be trained in the use of a variety of tools, which there are several key major types. So WYSIWYG, it stands for What You See Is What You Get. It's a type of editor that a bunch of you are likely familiar with, just using the internet in the past. So on the left side of this screen, you can see the editor in its visual mode, which gives you a preview of the content you're working on, versus on the right you see raw code. This is HTML actually. So this allows your users to preview their work as they write, and that offers a significant time-saving gain. And additionally, the buttons that you see along the top of the editor allow you to shortcut complicated tasks like styling, fonts, and building tables. So a well-designed WYSIWYG editor, it will automate these tasks for the user without the need to have a great deal of experience using HTML or CSS. Likewise, widgets are a drag-and-drop element that breaks complicated code elements into manageable objects. Here you can see a list of available widgets, things like CTA blocks and video embeds, and a widget area that controls the website's sidebar. The widgets themselves are customizable, so you can just drag them from the available screen onto the area you would prefer, and you can change the content and swap out based on your marketing needs. Custom post types are a way of segmenting your website content into manageable verticals. So rather than relying on the default post type of your CMS, which would just be a single sort of blog entry, you can split regularly updated content into thematic lines to appear in grouped areas for easy management. And these areas will populate into the front end of your website. So in this example, you can see that posts would translate over into the blog area, as I said, but we also have tools and case studies that will all be grouped and transferred over and easily managed. For the layout design, a very powerful tool is advanced custom fields. And this will allow you to create modular content blocks that can be reordered and customized as necessary. So on the right side of this slide, we can see those blocks in their collapsed state, where they can just be dragged and dropped in the order you would like to easily arrange them. And you can see that each block is based on a preset template with different layout options. So we have a block intro, maybe just a sort of solid text field centered with a little styling around it, and then we have a featured icons area where you'd be able to drop in specific icons that you would like to appear in that spot in a nice grid pattern. And on the left, we can see one of those blocks expanded. It's the featured icons one I was talking about, and the variety of pick and click options that become available. So you can just very easily rearrange those areas and correct their colors and styling. So now we can see those blocks in use on the front end of the website, where each segment is visually distinct. They're sort of stacked one on top of each other like blocks. And it'd be very easy just to reorder for the preferred layouts and alter the color to create visual consistency and continuity. And of course, in continuing to edit and improve your website, one of the most important considerations is to figure out what changes actually work. So you can split your performance reporting into three major categories. You'll have your business, marketing, and your test and learn diagnostics. The first two of these being more about grabbing gross numbers for seeing how seeing how your overall strategy is doing, whereas the third is about specific elements and testing along those lines. So for business, you're really looking at opportunities and revenue that has been sourced and touched by your marketing team. For marketing, we're looking at visitors, prospects, active prospects within the last 30 to 90 days, and your assigned marketing qualified leads, which really fits into the pipeline layout that Scott was discussing earlier. And for test and learn diagnostics, you have specific elements like a CTA or a landing page that you can test against one another to see which are being the most successful for your ongoing strategy. And one of the most useful metrics for comparing these values is really against yourself. The numbers are going to vary industry by industry, but if you can look at your past performance and see I'm doing X amount better than I was in the past, you know that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's terrific, Matteo. This is a really important slide because a website for lead generation is not a static project. You really should be building a platform upon which you can do your marketing. And so we built a strategy around objectives. We built a design around objectives. We've built our pages based on a customer-facing pathway. And then Matteo walked us through some of the tools that can be built into the back-end administration of the site that allows the marketing user to do things like change up the call to action or change up the form that a link goes to without having to do redevelopment of the site. That allows you to do lots of test and learning diagnostics once your site launches. So you launch a new site, you compare the benchmark metrics of how many visitors came to the site, how many visitors did we acquire, how deeply did we engage them, and how many turned into sales-ready leads or assigned prospects. On your old site, you compare those metrics to the new site, and then to Matteo's point, you want to be constantly testing and learning how do you improve results on your new site using that marketing-friendly backend. You want to be reporting to your CEO and your board how many opportunities in revenue you sourced and how many opportunities in revenue you touched. And so if you're using a marketing automation platform combined with a sales CRM, you'll be able to get closed loop reporting around those numbers. And you'll be able to make the overall case that marketing is worth having on the team. That's really as deep as the CEO's vision should go in terms of what are you doing. But your marketing team really needs to be prioritizing budget, resources, and activities around your biggest pipeline problems or challenges. So if you have lots of names in your database, acquiring more prospects shouldn't be your primary marketing challenge. You should be focusing your website, and frankly, you should be focusing the majority of your marketing opportunities on engaging and activating prospects, and then on qualifying and assigning prospects, so that you're pushing more marketing sourced leads into the sales pipeline and creating those opportunities and revenue. Very often, in the absence of that strategic level, what happens is that our marketing teams end up reporting on more diagnostic metrics, like how many page views were we getting, or what was the form completion or click-through rate on a specific call to action. And those are all very useful diagnostic info. But really, you want to tell the story of how much you affected the business and where your marketing priorities are sitting. And you want to do that so that you can get some money to continue operating marketing successfully and stating the case about your value proposition. So that's a great introduction, taking us into, what should you be budgeting for a project like this? Well, budgeting is tricky. Every client's project is a bit different. We really look at it in 3 different buckets. There's an existing site where you're doing some tweaks or updates, and that's often a budget of less than $20,000. A brand new site development is sort of in the $55,000 to $60,000 zone. Those are US dollars. But a very complex site with lots of traffic or lots of content, maybe it's multi-language, will be a $100,000 plus exercise. Now, when you compare those numbers to some of the budgets that you see online, you'll say, well, hey, wait, I can find a local developer who can do a site for us for $10,000 to $15,000. I want to break out what's within the numbers at the top level. The key part to success in building a lead generation site is actually not the graphic design, and it's not even the development. It's really understanding site architecture, content, and technology integration, including your marketing automation system to make that work. So you take a look at this chart where we break out the budget line items. Site design and coding is in fact in that $10,000 to $20,000 range for a site. But you want to put a big strategic overlay and a big marketing execution underlay on that project to make sure that you're achieving the results that you want. So on the left-hand side, client of ours, Merchantry, where we were able to do a website refresh, updating their navigation to be much more customer focused, and adding the ability to have tiered calls to action to the site for under 20,000. On the flip side, the Livingston case that I was talking about, that was a $100,000 plus project. Okay, I'm going to pause now. Matteo and I went through that material relatively quickly to leave room for questions and some examples. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions from the audience or questions, Scott, from you and your team.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Matteo, that was fascinating. A lot of stuff that we've seen before, but interesting how you've added more depth around that. So I've got some couple of questions that have come in and some questions from myself. So the first one is around, obviously parallax design is very hot and topical. And what's your views on the parallax design methodology as it relates to sort of best practice website design for B2B lead generation?
Oh, what a great question, Scott. We get asked that on almost every project these days. So just for those listeners who don't know what parallax is, that's really the long scrolling, almost all your information on your home page approach that is very current right now in website design. So if you go to a site like Square, the new payment people, they have almost all the information that you would need on that home page, and their navigation's actually quite muted. Parallax has grown really for two reasons. One, the design community follows trends like everybody else, and so it is just a big design trend right now. But secondly, it's also a response to the fact that mobile devices look at screens in a portrait orientation as opposed to laptops or computers or tablets that tend to look at web pages in a landscape orientation. So one's horizontally focused or one's vertically focused. There's lots of great reasons to consider parallax design to make your site feel modern or respond to that mobile traffic. But here are some reasons to be cautious. Almost all current data is still showing that the majority of the page view and clicks are happening above the fold. So in parallax design, a lot of your information gets buried below the fold or below the bottom of the originally visible page. And it's going to be really hard to work that golden triangle that I talked about. I'll flip back up to it just so we can see it. If you're using a parallax design, because the page ends before the majority of your messaging shows up. So even if you have your designer do a parallax homepage, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're placing all of your priority information at the top. The second is you can't actually measure and track a viewer's pathway or a buyer's pathway unless the page updates via URL. So if you put all of your information on one page on your home page and the viewer arrives and scrolls, it's going to be much harder for you to identify which content on your website they're interested in, how to segment them based on their choices, and even offer them content or calls to action that are more tailored to some of the choices that they've been making along their buyer's journey. So we always consider parallax for design or aesthetic reasons, but from a marketing objectives perspective, you really need to be keeping some of these core design principles in place when you build your site. We've got Livingston's a great example. I showed their site redesign. They actually recently had a new CEO who pushed for a parallax design on their homepage. And in that parallax design, what happens is that many of the key calls to action ended up buried below the fold. And their get a quote response rates have declined by over 200% in the first couple of months of that homepage launch. So it can have a real dramatic impact on the lead generation results that your site's producing.
Wow, interesting, particularly the stats around Livingston. So a second question, when you're at the early stages of discussing with a client a potential project, and you know that they have a marketing automation platform, compared to the same situation but where you know that they don't, how does that affect the way that you approach the website?
Oh, that's a great question, Scott. So if the objective of your website is lead generation, then we strongly recommend you use best-in-class lead management technologies. And so that usually means a discussion around marketing automation platform and sales CRM platforms. If you are a very small company that just does not have the investments in place or the budget in place to afford those tool sets, there are some workarounds. So we typically develop in the WordPress world. It's the right combination of user friendliness, easier on the budget, and rapid deployment. Not to mention a big community of plugins or applications that can work on a website. And so there are some lead capture tools and behavior profiling tools that work in a WordPress universe. Gravity Forms would be a great example, that are relatively robust. They will not give you the functionality that marketing automation does. Specifically, and Scott, you talked about it, Google Analytics and those tools similar to it really identify prospect behavior at an anonymous level. And so you're seeing aggregate data around what's happening on your website. Marketing automation tools provide insight at a prospect level. So you can take a look, you may have 10,000 visitors to your website, like IRT did, because they were in the space of infrared technology, and there are a lot of consumer searches for infrared that really were not the target audience for that company. They may only have dozens of qualified visitors on their site out of 10,000 total visitors. And the behavior that you're interested in is not the 10,000 anonymous visitors, it's really the dozens of qualified prospects who've opted in. And so a marketing automation system will give you just that much more detail about what's happening at a prospect level on your site. But we certainly would never build a lead generation site that didn't have a combination of some of those technologies to support it.
And what when you also at the start is when you talk about the timing that's involved in a website project, what do you typically counsel?
So the design and development portion of your site is typically around 6 weeks. But there's an upfront component, which is building the strategy. And then there is a content loading and Q&A process that happens at the tail end of that. And so that can often dramatically affect the timeline. Look, the reality is that most B2B clients live in a quarterly paced world. The reality of most of the clients that we talk to is that they had website design and development on their to-do list for the last couple of years. And they've just been having trouble getting the decision made to move the project forward until the pain is so great that it needs to be done immediately. So we try to keep our projects happening as quickly as possible, but with the right amount of strategic thinking. Typically, a project for us is sort of 4 months, 4 to 5 months, so it's only 6 weeks of design and coding, but there is a pretty thorough content strategy and objectives process up front. There's a content development process that often happens client-side that goes in tandem, and then there's the loading and proofing of the site. If it's going to be a multi-language site or multilingual site operating in different jurisdictions, or it has e-commerce functionality, that can dramatically affect that timeline. But for your average B2B lead generation site, we recommend clients budget 16 to 18 weeks. And if they really do have the time and want, and we can get it, a 20-week project is much easier for clients to manage because they also have a full-time job.
Okay, I've got a final one here, which is, so to what extent does design affect your Google rankings? I hear all the time that we should construct our site in such a way that Google will understand it. Is that true? I'm inclined to believe that content is more of a driver for search than layout.
Oh, what a terrific question. So Google actually is really, it's no longer the world of SEO magicians who can build a series of false links or play with your meta tags on your site and make dramatic improvements in the ranking. Google is a company that earns billions of dollars and reinvests those billions of dollars against the simple premise of trying to connect the most high quality relevant information with the information that Google users are searching for. And so they've published what they want to see in terms of site design and structure in order to rank well. And cheating that system really has become virtually impossible and actually quite dangerous, because Google spends part of those billions of dollars every year in helping to identify and penalize people who are working hard to cheat the system. So that question is right from the extent of high quality content is definitely the best place to invest in terms of ranking well. But site layout or design has a minimal impact. Site structure and technology can have a big impact. Google has published standards. For example, it really wants every page to be about a specific searchable topic. And it wants it to be really easy to identify what that page is about. So it wants that information or the keyword string that the page is about to be in your URL, to be in the page title, to be on the page itself, to be referenced in links to that page and from that page, to be referenced in the images on that page, etc. And it wants, if you're saying that a page is about B2B marketing content, then it really, when it reads the content, and Google does scan and analyze the content on page, it really wants the story that it's reading to match what it expects a story around B2B marketing content to be. And if you've used Google as a search engine, you know it's pretty good at predicting what the next word in your search query is going to be. And so a really great strategy is to take that buyer pathway approach and actually build content silos or content categories on your site where related information is grouped together in a way that your user would expect to see it. So I'm going to see website best practice, then I'm going to see a subpage around website best practice examples, website best practice budget, website best practice design guidelines, website best practice planning template. Google knows, based on the searches that other people have done, that actually means that collection of website best practice information is likely much stronger. So if you build that pathway based around what your buyer's looking for, you're also going to naturally build a pathway that Google's going to identify as higher quality content. And then finally, you need to make sure that your site is built with tools so that it's technically optimized. In the WordPress world, there's really one winning tool in that space. It's called SEO for WordPress by Yoast. And it really does all of the heavy lifting that you used to pay an SEO consultant for. It will even give you a nice green, yellow, red button on your page saying how well you've optimized your on-page content to improve your search results. So it's a really fabulous tool.
Brilliant. Well, that is all the questions that we have today. So Scott, Matteo, I would like to thank you for such a great insight into the latest on best practice website design. And I have a great day in Toronto. And thanks again for joining us. We will turn around the on-demand version and share it on email once we've got it up on our site. But thanks again, guys.
That's great, Scott. There's one little piece I was going to add on for everyone. We actually skipped a little section today on some of the technical requirements you should look at. So in the on-demand section, make sure you grab the slides as well. There's an appendix which has some of the development requirements that you should look at, including some of those technologies that I just talked about. And thanks
Brilliant.
very much for having us.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.